I can draw a direct line from just my interest in comics. And again, I don't work in comic entertainment, but I know that I am doing what I am doing because I read comics back in 1978. I mean, I'm convinced of that. I know that for a fact. Yeah.
But you must know a lot of comedians as well, and every comedian I know practically reads comics to some extent.
When you meet your average comedy person, comic books, serial killers, Brian Wilson's Smile album. Like those are your safe topics with anyone into comedy.
Hey, you lucky devils, just to let you know, we've got 5 new comics out this year from Dark Horse Comics. Nemesis Rogues Gallery is out in July. Prodigy 3 is out in August. Nightclub 2 also out in August. The Magic Order's big finale, Volume 5, is out in September, and the Jupiter's Legacy finale is finally here in October. Also out from Dark Horse this year, we have the Wanted and Big Game hardcover, a huge library edition, and the Ambassadors with all your favourite artists collected into one big beautiful hardcover in November. Don't miss it.
Hey.
Hey David, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Do you know I'm terrible? I'm so tired. Like
I was so sorry.
Unusually we're recording this in the morning, and I made the mistake of going out last night. Like I don't know if you guys do this, but whenever your kids start a new school, all the dads go out for a big drink. Do you guys do that in the States?
Not so much of that, but there'll be like more of a all the parents kind of event, I guess. It doesn't separate quite as much. I don't know why. Right. Yeah.
Oh no, we're still in 1974. It's just the dads go out for a drink.
You'll get to progress eventually. Yes, keep trying very hard.
So for anyone who doesn't know, normally we record in the evening, but because of the time difference, we're doing midnight and 7 a.m. for me. So
which is great for me. Sorry, this is perfect for me. I'm a night person. I'm getting my day going right now. This is wonderful. So yeah.
Do you write at night time then?
I do. I will write at night. I have never met a deadline that my brain can't calculate what is the latest possible time I can start to stay up all night and hand it in the next morning. It is the worst habit in the world. I had it through high school, college, and to this day. Give me a year on a project, and if I think I can write it in the last 3 days, I will write it in the last 3 days. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
I'm writing my 2026 books right now because I need to have a year buffer. It sounds crazy.
I'm still working on my 2023 stuff. I'm a little late. Yeah.
I freeze up. See, when I've got a deadline, I completely choke. If I have to get something tomorrow, I've got nothing.
I need the ships burning behind me. That's what I need. I need fear of death, threat, all sorts of whatever. Yeah. The bigger the threat, the more the adrenaline gets going, and the more what can I say? Kind of Kobayashi Maru it, like the challenge thereof, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm the complete opposite, honestly. And I also have to work by day. I get tired about 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to watch Shogun or something like that. Yeah.
Just take a nice little nap, little Shogun, no, I like that. No, I can work during the day, but given the choice, nighttime. Some of it's also, what can I tell you? We a house, 2 kids, whatever. It just it gets quiet. The phone stops ringing. Nobody's around. Everybody kind of goes to sleep, and I feel a little bit like. I guess the honest answer is this is the time. Midnight is when, in a perfect world, I will work, and honestly, midnight is the time. If I don't have work, that's when I want to do my own nonsense too. Whatever it is. So if I'm looking at I don't know, whatever, comic art, whatever. Midnight. That's a good time it's all midnight. Yeah.
It's romantic. I like the idea of this stuff being done during the night.
Other than I'm alone or with a couple of other guys, it's very romantic. Yeah.
One man romance.
Yeah. It's a romance based on my wife going to sleep. That's the romance. So yeah.
Here's the pitch. That's a great pitch.
Good night. Let me put on some music.
I've said to you before, I always think your IMDb page is like John Cazale, it's like the Godfather, the Deer Hunter, and everything. Everything you do has just been amazing, And I feel you've had this really gilded life, you went from Harvard or Yale or something?
In television. How about in television? Can put that in parentheses? Yeah.
But that's the bit everybody loves, wasn't it? Because I remember, you know, you go from SNL when you're a kid, you know, I mean, you're really just at university, aren't you? And then these Seinfelds, and then you've got Curb Your Enthusiasm, then Veep and White House Plumbers. It's like, there's no duds. It's kind of, I really admire it, you know, like everybody's got something they're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, you know, or that didn't work out so well. But you must feel pretty good when you go to bed at 4 a.m. You know, you must think this,
you know, when it's 5, 6 in the morning, I can sleep. Yeah, no. I mean, look, I've got no answer. I wish I could sit here and say, thank you. I'll say thank you. There was no great plan. You know, I was able to work in places that in some cases that I was huge fans of to begin with. You know, I mean, SNL was an absolute dream come true. I mean, I was growing up in New York City, and it was going to be, you know, I guess, you know, SNL and Letterman, which both shot in New York, were, I guess, the two rival dreams. And I ended up doing the SNL thing. And one very naturally led to the next, you know, I mean, sort of, there was no grand plan, but Seinfeld, you know, like SNL kind of led to Seinfeld. Seinfeld obviously led to Curb. Maybe there was a plan there. These things just kind of led to each other. But, you know, they all are similar in the sense of they're the kind of comedy I like. They're the kind of casts I like, you know, the people I like, you know, all of those kinds of things. And I learned from each one. So as I did have, you know, incremental control as I kind of moved along, you know, you try and steer it a little bit, you know, once you worked, especially with Larry David, just in terms of the way he did it, the way he paid no attention to the network and just, you know, told them to go fuck themselves if they tried to interfere. And the way it was about being funny, which sounds crazy, but is often not the chief regard of a comedy show. You know what I mean? There are so many comedy shows that are so worried about moments and feelings and all these other things. And, you know, Larry just wanted the show to be funny, and maybe Curb even more so. And his fearlessness of just a willingness to just look ugly in a sense and be a little ugly in the name of comedy and not worry about like, oh, I don't know if I like our guy and all that kind of namby-pamby kind of stuff. And, you know, those things were sort of ingrained in me. And then, you know, you try and like you experience it and you just don't want anything else. There's no other place you can really work. I mean, in some ways. So, yeah.
It's funny because
I don't know if I answered anything. I just sort of spoke.
It's so true. You guys, you kind of hit herd immunity almost in terms of, you know, whenever people were, you know, attacking people online and so on, you know, you seem to kind of avoid all that. Like Larry David in particular, you know, he's got herd immunity for this, which I love. Do you think, what lets him get away with it, do you think?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, obviously, you know, it's funny. I was thinking about him. I was thinking about like Julia on Veep, where their characters can often be very, very unlikable. I mean, you know, on Veep, Selena, borderline, if not over the borderline, occasionally racist, kind of hates women. I mean, like says, you know, truly outrageous things. Larry, absolutely all the time, always, you know, interested, you know, race is an issue, all these things that are such, I don't know what to say, hot button topics, certainly in America, if not the world. And look, there's a lot to be said for their inherent likability as human beings. Like that, even though they are both acting, you know, you do get the sense that they are quality people, which is a huge, I don't know, ongoing issue or argument that I think I've always had with, like network people, which is they read a script and, you know, it can be a little unlikable on the page and you sort of are going, right, that's why we're going to cast somebody that everybody likes and knows is funny and all of those things. And of course, you know, these executives who've, you know, been in the business for 20 years and just can't even imagine, like, I don't understand. I can't see it. You know, I have no imagination. So enough about executives. But, no, I mean, there's an inherent likability to them. And I don't know, maybe there's some sort of Seinfeld grandfathered in that like everybody just kind of goes, well, they were on Seinfeld. You know, it's like they were on I Love Lucy. I think they're okay. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I mean, obviously, again, they are inherently good people. You know that they are not, they're the things that they are saying both comedically and also usually to make a point about people who might say things like that, if that makes any sense. So, you know, they're always, in a weird way, they're almost punching at themselves, certainly never punching down. The joke isn't about like, oh, they're saying something racist to, whatever, be funny about make fun of whatever. It's more about, oh, like, and again, I'm talking maybe more about like Selena, like, oh, she's a racist, or the casual racism in politics, those kinds of things. So I don't know. Again,
that's funny, because you never doubt them as people. You know it's somebody playing a part, don't you? So I mean, that's the beauty of casting, isn't it? That's the magic of it, and why it works sometimes and why
no credit for either of their casting. Let me be really clear about that. But I think it's pretty safe to say, with Julia certainly. I mean, Larry obviously always plays kind of Larry-esque in a great way. But with Julia, I mean, you could put her literally in anything. And by the way, we are seeing that right now. She's in Marvel movies, but also independent, weird indies, so you literally can put her in anything. And I do recommend putting her in whatever you can put her in. She's the best. Yeah.
We have in this country, have you heard of Cambridge Footlights and Oxbridge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like our entire comedy scene for the last 50, 60 years kind of sprung from that. And I feel like that sort of early 90s, sort of Seinfeld scene and everything, like everybody we love sort of came from that. There's so much goodwill comes from loving those guys in the 90s.
I was always very fascinated by, and again, I don't know enough about them, but the idea of, my background, my experience, I'll go kind of like that if you can see anything, was I got into comedy writing at Harvard, the Harvard Lampoon, which is different than Footlights and whatnot, but there is a similar origin story, if you will. So I've always been very fascinated, and obviously all the various people, be it, the Emma Thompsons and whatnot, and, Rowan Atkinsons, and just everybody, I guess is the honest answer, from Python on forward. But I'm fascinated by that. So sorry, just a little comedy nerding out a little bit.
But they're on a tiny stage. I mean, all those people went to university at the same time, all born around the same time, and just they dominated things for a generation. It's amazing.
But also how much they also clearly like working together, that they're constantly pulling each other into each other's projects. But also, just that improv ability. Obviously they obviously can play parts. They're wonderful. I mean, in some ways it's an amazing thing. They're great. Most of them are great actors and great writers, but also great improvers, so that they are on stage or in a part acting, but able to, we had I had the lovely experience of working with Hugh Laurie on Veep. And so he's with us maintaining his American accent the entire time. So on stage and off, because that just is easier for his brain. So he's acting and improving. I mean, not a foreign language, but it might as well be a foreign language. And at some point you do occasionally stop and just go, man, that's impressive. So yeah.
Do you know that happened to me with Christian Bale on the Batman set? It was a weird thing. I was visiting a friend on the Dark Knight set, and I was standing talking to Christian Bale. We were standing having a cup of tea and eating a donut, and he kept his American accent going, as a lot of people do. He's Welsh, and we were sort of talking for about 20 minutes. And then I said to him, what part of Wales is it your family's from? And he said, I'm not from Wales. I'm from about 10 miles outside of Gotham City. And I realized he'd been in Carrington.
Right, he just has to be. Yeah, you were having tea with Bruce Wayne, basically.
With Bruce Wayne. And it just had nothing else to say. I was like, it was a Kaiser Soze kind of moment for me. But you know where you come on my radar though? Like a lot of comic nerds, like I was so excited when I saw the Bizarro episode.
And that's Seinfeld, the one. Yeah.
And people don't realize this now, because that was 30 years ago, But like people don't realize this, but there was a time when it wasn't cool to be into this kind of stuff, So whenever you'd see little hints of it in shows like Seinfeld, you were like, there's other guys out there. It was a bit like being a gay man in the 50s, where
right, a lot of like code, a lot of code,
things like that. And it was so exciting. A friend of mine sent me a VHS videotape of it, and that began my love affair with Seinfeld. A pal of mine in New York sent me it, because we didn't really get Seinfeld in the UK. They handled it
not
really
for
badly.
a couple of years till later, right? Yeah.
Also, the BBC handled it so badly, they put it on during the night. It was the maddest thing. Like they put it on at 1 a.m. or something. So Gary Shandling and Seinfeld, the two greatest shows of the 90s, they put on after midnight on a Tuesday night. So I got this episode and I was like blown away. But I've always wondered, obviously I got all the references. What did normies make of that episode? Did it?
It's funny. It was one of those things where, this is my sense of it. Yeah. We did go out of our way. The wonderful thing about Jerry at the time was, Jerry was a big Superman fan, obviously.
Yeah.
I think that was sort of known about him. And as he always said, he worked at night. He was a stand-up comic. And so what did he do during the day? Especially when he was younger, he, bought comics, read them, and, sat around in diners and whatnot. So, he was very kind of clued into it. And obviously, in some ways, and I credit him, he had me push it even further. Like the original version of it did not have, like, I guess sort of that final scene where you're full on in the other bizarro apartment, and it didn't have the me so happy, me want to cry at the very, very end, which, I don't know what regular people made of that. However, what I was going to say is, we tried to explain the concept in it. We tried to spoon feed it to those that didn't know. But what I definitely noticed, even in around not like comic fans, but not hardcore comic fans, was at the time, Bizarro had kind of fallen a little bit out of favor, just in Superman world, if you think about it at that time. Yeah. He'd popped around in the 70s. He'd been on Challenge of the Super Friends and whatnot. And what was interesting was, it was kind of like, even for comic fans, it kind of like, I don't know, it felt like it brought the word bizarro into the mainstream a little bit and kind of got Bizarro a little bit back into the comics. Yeah. But people went with it. I mean, that was the beautiful thing about Seinfeld was, in a weird way, you could teach, like you could kind of go, we're going on this weird adventure. And in this case, into the, the idea of Bizarro Superman. And the audience was so with the show at that point, because, it's like whatever, season 6 or 7, I can't remember, that you could do those things. But, it was funny. I managed to do that. And there's another episode in there. I don't know if you'd remember it. There's no reason you would. It was not an entire story, but we did a cold opening that was all about, Jerry and George arguing about what Tony Stark wears under the armor. The underwear, we did that, and it airs on a Thursday night, and Friday morning, Stan Lee's office called. And so, don't get me wrong, I worked on Seinfeld. It was great. It was we were the best show and all those good things. But all of a sudden, for me as a comic fan, holy shit, Stan Lee's office wants to talk to me and get on the phone. Those are the victories. I mean, that's kind of, I know a lot of people get into Hollywood for the cars and the women and whatnot, but I got into it so that Stan Lee would call my office one day, which was kind of great. Yeah.
And I always felt in the 90s that there was guys who were sort of secretly into comics and they maybe knew each other, like the Damon Lindelof kind of guys and everything, guys that were working on Nash Bridges and things who were comic fans. Did you kind of have a sense, was there a little comic community in LA? Did you hang out with any guys?
Funny. I mean, I definitely, in going to because when I first moved out to LA, that's when I started going to San Diego Comic-Con. I had never gone before. And so definitely that sort of sense of the LA people going down to Comic-Con, which is nowhere near what it is now. I'm talking, 95 when you could decide to go on Saturday morning, buy a ticket, get a hotel room and park, a block away from the hotel for $24, a very different time. But you definitely were aware of oh, hey, you and whatever, and a couple of the Simpsons writers and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know if there was there was no organization, and I didn't get to meet Damon till years later, with the Lost stuff. So there was no organization, but there were those moments of oh, hey, that. There was definitely that. But it was just that very funny thing because, the idea that you would make a superhero movie was just, insane.
Even a Batman movie.
Yeah, exactly. It was there had been Superman, there had been Batman, and those seemed done. And just nobody was interested. And nobody was interested in it. The idea if you were going to what do you want to pitch now? Was there something I could do in the superhero world? Oh my God, they'd look at you like you were crazy. Just madness. So yeah.
But it always, we've talked about this before, but you seem such a logical person to be in that world. It's so strange that you did.
And yet, here I sit. Yeah. No,
but you've never really quite had the inclination, haven't you? You've never really had a burning project you wanted to do.
I've always worried a little bit, and this is going to sound silly. I still read comics every week. I was about to say I still go to the comic store every week. I will admit in sort of I got kind of used during COVID. I kind of got used to not going to the store and simply sending in my list of new books and then having them gotten to me. So I will admit that I don't go physically always to the store, but every Wednesday, one way or another, new books, come into my hand and I read them. I mean, literally it is now early Thursday morning, but it was Wednesday night. And about 4 hours ago, I sat down and, I was thumbing through whatever came out this week. There was a new Iron Man book, Wonder Woman number whatever by Tom King. I mean, I just read 5 comic books earlier tonight. So I read every week. And so there has always been a little bit of an element of, I don't know, dare I say, like, if I work on a comic book thing, and it's a terrible experience, is it going to ruin my comic purchasing? Am I going to want to go into my, collection and throw all my comic art out the window because I'm so angry at it? You know what I mean? It's almost like the chef that doesn't want to eat their own food. Now,
it's too pure for you. Then. It's too pure.
Yeah, but that all being said, allow me to say that it's very easy for me to sit here and say that when no one has actually ever offered me a job in comics. You're maybe the closest, where occasionally you have said to me, "Hey, are you available to talk about something?" And I've had to say, "I'm sorry, man, you're Netflix and I'm HBO and whatnot." You're the closest. So again, it's very easy to be so pure and to speak of higher ideals when no one has actually ever offered me a job.
But you must have your take on Superman or your take on X-Men or something. That must be in
I feel like I have takes. I don't know, but you know what I mean? I do think there's a thing, and it happens very much. And I don't know if this happens, in the comic industry, but maybe it does. You can tell me this. It certainly happens in Hollywood, maybe less so now, but certainly more so. You get defined. People want to always put you in a box. And my box is the comedy box.
Yeah.
And I told this story once years ago. My old partners and I was working at the time with Jeff Schaefer and Alec Berg. We had done Eurotrip together. We worked on Seinfeld together. We went to school together. We worked together for a number of years. We don't work together anymore. Jeff is doing the current season of Curb. Alec did Silicon Valley and Barry. I went to Veep, but we're still, quite good friends. And at some point or another, and this is years ago, we got a meeting to pitch on, they were trying to do the A-Team movie at the time. Right. And we were the perfect age. And we loved the A-Team. And we went in, and there was definitely, I'll simply say, our pitch, dare I say, had humorous dialogue, the way the great action movies, the way an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie can be funny.
Shane Black,
exactly. Shane Black. Perfect. And yet, obviously, at the end of the day, they are action movies. And we went in and we pitched our take on an A-Team movie. And I remember they just kept thinking that we were somehow spoofing it. Like what we were pitching was somehow the airplane version of an A-Team movie. And we kept trying to, I don't know what to say. We kept sort of saying, no. This is a straight action movie. Like it's humorous, but it's an action movie. And they just didn't understand it. And I think part of it was they themselves had no idea what you should do with the A-Team to begin with, but therefore they couldn't imagine of just doing it. I don't know. I don't have an answer, but they definitely just could not see us as anything other than comedy writers. And it's a funny thing where, look, the Marvel movies are often very funny, and it looks like, I guess I don't know anything, but it seems like with James Gunn involved, I think some of the new DC movies will be funnier. But it's a funny thing that, when I always hear about like how these things work, obviously they don't necessarily bring in comedy writers, and you just hear stories about like, you always hear about like Mike, like Robert Downey Jr., like ad-libbing his part. And it's just sort of like, or bring a comedy writer in to help with that, but they don't.
I never really believed that. as well. You know, the actors love to say they make it up, but
no, I think what's really happening, and I'm not looking to attack Robert Downey Jr. My guess has always been is that Robert Downey Jr. is reaching out to either writers he knows, perhaps like Shane Black, and whether he is asking favors or paying them on the side, someone is doing it. But Marvel themselves is not the ones that seem to be doing it. They don't seem to have interest in me, and such is life. Yeah.
But do you have one in you that you would love to do? Is there
you mean specifically like I've always wanted to? A million years ago, and I do mean a million years ago, when I was at SNL, Lorne Michaels' company, Broadway Video at the time, which was experimenting with comics, and at some point or another was in bed with Jim Shooter and Dominion, maybe, or one of those things. But somewhere in there, I think they acquired some of the rights to Swamp Thing, and I was dying to do Hellblazer. I was dying to do Constantine. This is years and years and years ago.
That's so left field. I would never have guessed that one.
Only because I just always thought he was such a funny motherfucker. Like just on the page. Yes, just an incredible character. Obviously an anti-hero and all of that kind of stuff. I'm not somebody like, I knew guys growing up, you know, not necessarily entertainment guys, but, you know, comic fans that were like, oh, you want to hear what my idea is for Wolverine's origin? I don't have that. I never sat around and thought up my own version of it. And look, I'm not going to lie. You know, when I think of it, like stories, whatever, you know, like I have a Superman story I always wanted to do, but it's nobody's idea of a movie. And by the way, it's nobody's idea of a comic. I always had this idea, that I always called sort of, you know, I basically wanted to put Clark Kent in the role of Lois Lane, where basically like there's a new superhero in town, and I was going to pull out of the 70s, like, you know, either like Vartox or one of those kind of characters. And at the same time, there's a new reporter at the Daily Planet, like a new sports reporter or whatever, who looks like Vartox, with glasses or something. And Clark Kent, Superman, is convinced that Vartox, Steve Sanders is Vartox, and is very much the Lois Lane of trying to prove it. And in some ways, it was really just Superman's gay crush. But anyway, no one really wants that either. So yeah, maybe that's why none of the comic companies call me and none of the movie companies call me.
Vartox did almost feel like Superman's gay crush, though, didn't he? I always thought they had an odd relationship, didn't they? They would show up and they would argue and things like that.
Yeah, no, they were at the time they were sort of rivals, like kind of like strange rivals. And then I think like Lana was that was how they kind of got rid of Lana Lang. She kind of now she was into Vartox, whatever. But that was the wild and woolly world of late 70s action comics. So yeah.
For me, like those stuff is pure gold. Like nobody really talks about those comics anymore.
I love that stuff. I love
for me,
that stuff.
Because you and I are about the same age, you know. So were you a DC guy growing up?
It's funny. I'm the rare creature where I read both. I probably read a little more DC. I think I was deeper on my DC, but at the same time, I was reading, Millar Daredevil, X-Men and all that stuff. So that was always very constant for me, even though I think I was deeper on the DC. I would read everything Superman and Batman no matter what.
Superman just had to be in the cover. I was the perfect customer. I would just buy it if Superman was in the cover.
Just whatever it is. And I would even read World's Finest, which at that point was not a good comic. Not a good comic. But
there was one good four-parter, actually. David Anthony Kraft wrote a great four-parter in our childhoods. Yeah, it's really, check it out. I think it's like 296 to 299, something like that.
I will check that out. And my other thing that I truly love when you're talking about like Superman is, and I got into those things. Probably got into it when I was really young. Yeah. Like when I would go to summer camp and my mom would send me the digests, the little books,
and the tiny comic.
Which reprinted all the various, like that's where I kind of got my, like the 60s stuff. You know what I mean? Because all of a sudden I read like Superman Red, Superman Blue in the digest. And I was reading all these kind of classic stories. It's kind of where I read a lot of Bizarro stuff in there. That and the big Fireside Compendium, Superman from the 30s to the 70s and Batman from the 30s to 70s. Yeah.
I love that.
I had the Superman, the Batman, and the Shazam one. And then years later I discovered there was, I guess, a Wonder Woman one.
There's two versions of the Superman one?
No, I only had the 30s to the 70s with the white cover with the comic strip on
They're
it.
exactly the same covers, everything, but one is twice as big as the other one, you know? So the one I got when I was 9, maybe has about 10 stories in it or something like that. And then I found the bigger one, which is probably the one you've got, the thicker one.
I definitely have the bigger one. I have the bigger one where it was very big and the dead center was like a little color section. Like they had
that's because I found that later and it was like finding the DVD extras on the book I originally had, you know. So I mean, you must have been with the same age, like I say, like Superman the movie must have been transformative for you, you know, when that came out. Well, give me the scene when that appears for you. You know, do you remember going to see it for the first time?
Oh, I definitely remember going to see it. My father loved big movies. I mean, he wasn't necessarily a superhero guy, but he loved big movies.
Yeah.
And his favorite thing in the world to get his money's worth was to sit through it twice. That was his thing, which of course, you know, back then there were no assigned seats, so you could do. Yeah. And so, we sat through it twice and it's vivid to me seeing it and loving it. And then for the second time around, like maybe in a weird way, almost like the second time around sitting there, just wondering, how is he flying? Like the first time, just he is flying. And then how is he flying? And then that movie probably more than anything sent me down a path. I mean, I guess that and Star Wars into these various like making of paperbacks and like magazines, like any kind of like sci-fi magazine with pictures of Superman on it and, you know, weird speculations about what a sequel would be like, you know, all sorts of nonsense, but very much so like all these like sort of, you know, making of articles, you know, with like, you know, pictures of him on the wires and how they did that stuff. So on some level, I will put Superman right up there with sort of, I don't want to say specifically, because it's not like I work in special effects, but the whole idea of people working in movies, which ultimately is my job in some ways, I put right there with Superman and Star Wars because it really got me interested in, again, the kid version of like how these things are made. But yeah, twice the first time. It was incredible.
Did you ever have that big oversized thing? You know,
the big oversized thing with the back and the pictures. Yeah, totally.
And it tells you like Yvonne Fletcher is the costume designer, you know, things like that.
And you just go, now I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the sketches.
Because I know exactly what you mean. That was, I was maybe 8 or something at the time. And I remember that's when I realized these were done by people as opposed to machines.
Right.
And it was an actual
by the
career.
way, or elves. I didn't necessarily, I didn't make the jump that it was a career. I'm not sure I ever thought it was a career. That took me a while longer. It somehow seemed like these people were magically being chosen somehow to do it, but they were humans. You're right. They were people. It wasn't until later on that I really sort of put it all together that like that I could do it, I guess, if that makes any sense. But it definitely made me realize it existed, if that makes,
Well, I remember saying to my brother, who's 20 years older than me, my oldest brother, I don't know, whenever Superman flies off at the end and leaves Luthor in prison, and I remember saying, this is what I'm going to do when I'm older. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was going to be something to do with it.
Something involving that,
You know, you live in Scotland, you can't quite articulate it, you know, and it took a while for technology to catch up with it, you know. But Star Wars, I guess, is like that too, because you were looking behind the scenes with Lucas and all that.
The behind the scenes stuff, the Ralph McQuarrie art, you know, just buying those things, you know, then into like Starlog magazine. And again, like just these, you know, the various like, and then I think, I'm sure you guys got those things over in your part of the world. You know, they would do these, whatever 1 hour specials like on CBS, like the making of and the behind the scenes and whatnot. They did those for like Star Wars, Empire, Raiders, you know, and whatnot. And of course, those were like events unto themselves just to sort of, you know, I think I knew the name Vic Armstrong, who's the, you know, in Superman and Raiders. It's like, why do I know the name of it? Why does a 9-year-old know the name Vic Armstrong? Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of like, you just started devouring. And again, with no plan, no goal, but just I was fascinated by it, just beyond like enchanted by it, honestly.
I think when you have a creative job when you're older, that's you know, everybody has that point where they separate off from everybody else, don't they? Like, you start talking about things other people don't talk about. And that's when it's quite nice meeting other people who are likewise obsessed in the same way you are. I
have a good group of friends, you know, like my childhood friends, and they laugh a little bit about it because there's a moment where they were going to the comic store with me, if that makes sense. And some of them even still have, you know, in their mom's house or whatever, you know, like a short box of like, I don't know, some X-Men and whatnot. They still have some of their comics, but they kind of laugh because they're all lawyers and doctors now. And they kind of laugh like how we all used to go to the comic store together. And then at some point they stopped going to the comic book store, but I kept going to the comic book store. And now I do what I do and they do what they do. And it's just a very funny, they were there with me, but at some point they kind of peeled off. Yeah. But
it's a weird evolutionary thing, isn't it?
I just was, you know, like my father never loved, you know, he loved going to movies twice, and he certainly never particularly loved the price of a comic book. I guess that's the easiest way of putting it. He liked that I was reading. I mean, there was certainly no question that my love of reading really came out of comics. And as much as I was devouring comics, I was then also reading books. It wasn't just comics. It really, I was a reader. So thumbs up there from my father. But, you know, when we all look back on it now, I can draw a direct line from just my interest in comics. And again, I don't work in comic entertainment, but I know that I am doing what I am doing because I read comics back in 1978. I mean, I'm convinced of that. I know that for a fact. Yeah.
But you must know a lot of comedians as well, you know, and every comedian I know practically reads comics to some extent. There's a weird crossover with comics.
There's a funny crossover, which is when you meet your average comedy person, comic books, serial killers, Brian Wilson's Smile album. Like those are your safe topics with anyone into comedy. You can really kind of land on any of those three, and you're going to be able to fill a dinner conversation. Yeah.
Because I was wondering with Seinfeld, because I saw this interview with Seinfeld in lockdown, and I was obsessed with Seinfeld. I mean, Curb's my favourite show of all time, like of any show, any genre. You know, I love it. But Seinfeld was my gateway drug as well. You know, so,
of course,
I
and by the way, there is no Curb without Seinfeld, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
and Jerry, you know, I'll watch any interview he does and everything. But he had a Kirk Allen Superman original poster behind him. And I was like, hang on, that's not a faker. You know, these fake nerds.
No, he definitely was into it. And do you remember he got to do that? And this was all very much of his own making because he was very involved in the whole ad campaign thing. Do you remember his American Express commercial with Superman? Yeah, Superman? Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's very much, that's of Jerry's making. I mean, I wasn't privy to all of it. I was there. I got to visit the set, but that was very much of like, I want to do an American Express commercial with Superman. And it can't be at the time. I think Superman at the time had the long mullet, I think. Yeah. And Jerry was just like, no mullet, Kurt Swan Superman. So, you know, this is Jerry Seinfeld telling them Kurt Swan Superman, basically. And
so he knew
that was
the
real. That was real. Oh, yeah. That was a real deal. That was real deal.
Cool. See, I wondered if he was a guy, because age-wise he would be about right for George Reeves Superman. And I wondered if he just loved George Reeves Superman. But when I saw the Kirk Allen, I thought, he's one of us.
I never asked him specifically, you know, which versions. I'm sure he devoured it all. But I know for a fact Swan was a biggie for him. I always remember
reading the comics as well as watching the TV show.
Yeah. He never, you know, it's funny. At some point or another, someone offered me some Superman cover. Which one was it? Was it a cover or a splash? It's the one, it's the statue of Superman, and it's like Lois and Clark strolling next to it. Does that sound like an image you remember at all? I think it's an early 60s or maybe even a late 50s cover. It's a really nice one.
Park where they're walking along?
I think so, yes. And it's a big statue, and they're kind of arm in arm next to it.
Yes.
And
he's given up in Superman maybe or something. I
don't even remember. It's just a really good image. Yeah. And at the time it was offered to me, it was like one of those prices that seemed beyond me at the time. And of course I should have bought it. But I remember kind of showing it to Jerry, like, hey, do you have any interest? And he thought it was really cool. not a collector like that. Collects
Right.
cars and all his whatever, but
Yeah.
he didn't want to buy that, but certainly appreciated the F out of it, I guess is the easiest way of putting it. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's great, you know.
Hey, you lucky devils, just to let you know, we've got 5 new comics out this year from Dark Horse Comics. Nemesis Rogues Gallery is out in July. Prodigy 3 is out in August. Nightclub 2 also out in August. The Magic Order's big finale, Volume 5, is out in September. And the Jupiter's Legacy finale is finally here in October. Also out from Dark Horse this year, we have the Wanted and Big Game hardcover, a huge library edition, and the Ambassadors with all your favourite artists collected into one big beautiful hardcover in November. Don't miss it.
It's funny because you only have so much room in your heart. You know, like Cars is his thing, isn't it? You know, like, because I mean, we're obsessed with original comic book art. I know you've got one of the best collections out there. Haven't you? I mean, Are you still down that rabbit hole?
I am. It's just insane. Yeah.
It's too addictive, isn't it? It's too addictive.
It's a harder now. Obviously, you know, the numbers. I mean, I'm sure you saw, what was it? Yeah. You know, literally a couple of days ago, you know, Gaiman sold off a couple of pieces from his collection, raised like $1 million. You know what I mean? Like, which was lovely and all that kind of stuff. But it was just like, whoa, look at these numbers. You know what I mean? Like that Watchmen page just selling like crazy, and the Mobius death for like 100,000, you know, just wild. So I definitely here, it's like one of these things where the good news is I built up such a big collection that when these pieces come along that I have to have, I can buy it and then figure out how to pay for it later. Like, I'll sell 5 things I don't care about to get it, but I do still love it. And as I said, I'm still reading new stuff. So I'm always like trying to get stuff, you know, things like new things that I'm interested in. Like I'll read something new and go, who's this guy? You know, someone falls into my purview. But yeah, no, there's a master list of certain things that, like, you know, I'm still on the hunt for. And that's having, when I got into collecting, I made like this master list of things I never thought I would own, you know, like Daredevil 181 cover by Frank Millar or whatever. And I own them now. I was able to own them. And
did you write them down? Did you have a list?
Oh, I wrote them down. I have a list. I have a list somewhere and I wrote it down, like, and there's probably multiple versions of the list, but yeah, you know, and it's all stuff that, like, none of it would shock you. I mean, there'd be things that would surprise you, because there were things I was interested in, like Legion of Superheroes and Ambush Bug, and so like things that were funny, you know, things that were important to me that weren't necessarily the most popular stuff in the world, but also like big things like Daredevil 181 and, you know, like Giant Size X-Men 1 and things like that. And I own a lot of them. And I love it. And I go and I sit and I look at my stuff, and some of it's framed on the wall, and I love it. And, you know, probably if I were to say the, you know, when I moved to LA, obviously I know a lot of comedy writers and, you know, and that's who I sort of spend my days with. But really, when I moved to LA, my other group of people that I kind of gravitated towards were sort of other comic art collectors. That was my other, I guess, social circle. And some of them, you know, a lot of people do collect comic art, but I'm talking about like these hardcore guys from just other walks of life. You know what I mean? So yeah, but no, I still love it. I really do. I think
it's quite nice having an obsession with something that isn't too expensive as well, like Ambush Bug.
Well, it's great that within the world, but there are times where you go, wait, what? Ambush Bug selling for $15,000? What's going on? Because it has become.
Do you have the cover for one? Do you have the
I don't. What I have, I'm gonna date myself. My true obsession with Ambush Bug was when Julie Schwartz let Keith Giffen do him in those later issues of Action, you know, like the I think it's like in the 6 and like the 5 and 500s, like 5
just before John Byrne comes in.
Oh yes, exactly. Right before the restart, where he really let Giffen just kind of fuck around. And so it's a bunch of those issues. And also, you know, his first appearance in DC Comics Presents and the, Ambush Bug, and it was like the DC Comics Presents Superman and the Legion of Substitute Heroes, where Ambush Bug goes into the future. And
it's
then
done seriously, isn't it? Like, it's not goofy, you know, it's kind of a serious character almost.
Oh, it's really, it's sort of serious, and it's really smart, and it's in the early appearances, it's occasionally, ever so slightly, breaking the fourth wall, once in a blue moon, or at least a little bit of commenting. And then obviously when they go off into the miniseries, it really just goes to town in terms of breaking the fourth wall. But, you know, the notion of a comic having fun with itself, almost sort of parodying itself as it was going along, was to me so radical at the time. And I certainly, it's a huge comedic influence on me, for lack of any other word of way of saying it. Yeah.
Whatever happened to that guy? Because we all know Keith Giffen, amazing, you know, but Robert Loren Fleming, I always thought was a fantastic writer.
I don't know. Yeah, he was really wonderful. I don't know.
He did a miniseries called Underworld. Did you ever see that? And,
no, I didn't see Underworld. No.
He did a couple of really offbeat things. A thing about cops. It was kind of Hill Street Blues, DC Comics, called Underworld, and Ernie Colon was the artist on it, I think. And he did Thriller as well. Did you ever read Thriller?
No.
Oh, it's amazing with Trevor Von Eaton on art, you know. But he was a guy who he never quite blew up, and he should have, I think. You know?
It was interesting, you know, and I don't want to, I hope I'm not casting any, I don't know what the word is. I'm not trying to give anyone any shade or anything like that. But it seemed like when Giffen always wanted to have a writer with him, you know, always needed kind of a writer with him. Like that Giffen was an idea machine and maybe lines, but always wanted somebody to kind of put it all together. So he was always working with him. And those people with Giffen were 100% incredible, and then often went off on their own. And I don't know, I guess I just unfortunately lost track of a lot of them. And I think they're hit and miss, but I think a lot of them did do their best work with him, which is, I don't know, just one of those interesting collaborations, I think.
Like his Justice League in particular was amazing.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. And that's the one, sorry, you know, you want to talk about what should be a show. I mean, I don't know how you do it, because I think everyone tries to do it and they try and make it too funny in a weird way. They try, it becomes slapsticky. And I think at some point or another, they made a pilot, but those first, you know, whatever, 12 issues or so of the new Justice League, right up to where it became Justice League International. I mean, that's a sitcom. That's a show. That's as good as anything. All that, you know, one punch. I can't believe I missed it. Batman punching Guy Gardner. All of that stuff. I mean,
that's a moment in our childhoods, isn't it? Batman knocking out Guy Gardner.
Yeah,
is a moment in their childhoods, which is crazy.
But also, I mean, really funny, but also really good too, and not trying to be funny, which is the biggest crime. I don't know. My own comedy theories. Sometimes when you're trying to be funny, it's just, it's sweaty. It's not good. And there was just something effortless, especially to those first 12 issues. And it just, you're reading a really good superhero comic, but also it's really funny. And I just think there's never been anything like those first couple of issues there.
Stan Lee could do that as well. I think like Stan's stuff, it was a drama with comedy. And I think people, when they think about Keith Giffen's Justice League, they think of the broader comedy stuff, which
kind of became known for the broad stuff later, which is fine. Yeah.
You know, the Marvel movies now are comedies with dramatic moments, whereas the first 15 years of it was dramas with comedic elements, wasn't it? And it's a big difference, isn't it?
I think there's a big difference. You know, I look at like the two Thor movies, and I think like if you look at the last one, it feels like a comedy with drama, whereas the one before it was drama with comedy. And drama with comedy, I think, is always a little bit the better way to go than a comedy with drama, just in terms of the Marvel movies. You know, again, this is why I will not get a job there.
Do you not think the secret sauce with superhero films was taking it seriously, though, as well? You know, with the comedic elements, but it had to be a drama at its heart because it's so intrinsically silly that the minute you point out it's silly, it all comes crumbling down, doesn't it? You know?
It's you have to play it straight. And and again, it's the difference between, you can have funny dialogue, but funny dialogue is character based as opposed to being jokey or trying to be funny. Again, it's all interconnected, but that's, I think, where it all just goes down the drain. Any version of them. Yeah.
But American and British sitcoms are really different in that regard as well. That for me, I think all British sitcoms are rooted in tragedy. they're absolutely rooted in tragedy. Like everybody's a failure in British sitcoms, and you find the heart in his failure, and you know, it's almost like if you had to describe the plot, it sounds like a sad story, but for some reason it works. But American stuff is a little different, I think, isn't it? You know, like,
yeah, I mean, look, I think you also have to look at the American stuff and kind of almost like there's a dividing line, because obviously what passed for network sitcoms, the original, you know, CBS, ABC, NBC, not counting Norman Lear, not counting your Seinfeld and your exceptions to the rule, there was a very sort of generic, like everybody needs to be happy, guy gets girl, you know, everything is fine, everything is good. And also not much actually happens. Like, you know, it's basically, you know, fat guy arguing with pretty wife over who's going to take out the trash. And that's just a big load of nothing. I do think when American sitcoms kind of made the move, and again, really Seinfeld, I think, leads the way, even though Seinfeld was a multicam. Seinfeld is a multicam almost pretending to be a single cam, if that makes any sense. And then if off of that, you start having the single cams, and obviously, you know, you have The Office, which of course comes from the British Office, but you start to get into these shows where the lead characters, like, as you put it, all is not well. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, you know, maybe not always failures, but certainly, not the happy ending. And of course, that much more interesting. I mean, you know, again, back to Veep for 4 seconds. Part of what, you know, like early on where it's like, well, what's going to happen to her? It's like, well, she's just going to keep losing, because she's much funnier when she's on the wrong foot. You know, the second she wins, I don't know what that is, unless, you know, it just, because, you know, the failure is where you sort of get to cut away and sort of see who everybody really is. So I'm with you on that. I like that as a definition.
Because I think that's why the superhero comedic stuff doesn't quite work, but it tends to skew that way, a bit like Roger Moore's Bonds. You know, they'll start off kind of serious and then get sillier as they go on. I think we all end up with Superman 3 eventually, don't we? You know, you know, because
we all end up with Lenny Luthor. It's all Lenny Luthor nowadays. Is that it? No, I mean, look at those Roger Moore movies. I mean, give me The Spy Who Loved Me any day of the week. I will take Spy Who Loved Me. That was the first one I saw in a theater. Yeah, and I will take that. I have wanted to go to Egypt my entire life for one reason and one reason only, the pyramid show in The Spy Who Loved Me. It's just that simple. And, you know, but then you get to Moonraker and you're not unaware it's starting to get silly. And then by the time, you know, you're on the back end there, oh my God, it's really, it's tough. You know, it's hard to watch. And, you know, you get the sense that's what Roger Moore wanted. It's what the audience wanted. I guess that's what the producers wanted. I don't know. But, ooh, boy, again, and he's a gifted comedian. I think he has a really light touch, or can. But it just became, sometimes you felt like they only did that sequence so he could make that orgasm joke, you know, where like the shitty one-liners were driving the action sequences. You just kind of go, that's sort of ass backwards. Yeah.
But do you not think all franchises slightly go that way as well? You know, just when the guys get a little tired, they start taking the mickey out of their own material. It becomes
everything gets broader. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, you know, I did, you know, all those seasons of Veep, and obviously I took the show over from Armando Iannucci, and certainly the characters, even when I got a hold of them, were different than they had been in the earlier seasons. I mean, in some ways they were more defined, but in some ways they had become characters more, where like this guy does this and this guy says this, and the further you go, that gets locked in. And I do think that happens on every show. It happened on Seinfeld. I think it even happens on Curb. Like sometimes now, I love Curb. The stories are bigger. They're a little less real from time to time. That's not a criticism. It's just a truth. Everything kind of goes a little like this over the period of time, but you have to then that much more, I think, be a little more diligent and hold on to the reins, because otherwise you end up with, you know, whatever, From a View to a Kill or whatever. So yeah,
because I mean, Marvel's obviously post 2019. You know, Marvel's struggled with that, I think, but it is actually quite incredible that they had that 19 year run.
Yeah,
I mean, it's mind blowing when you think about it, isn't it? That almost everyone was brilliant, and people say, "What's the secret?" And I think it was because they were really good. You know?
No, they were really good. I mean, when it got to when that first Infinity Stone movie kind of came out, and obviously it was a, you know, to be continued and whatnot. And then obviously the sequel comes out. But that first one, I mean, I remember being in the theater, and I have, my son's now 14, my daughter's 16. I mean, they were into it. And now here we are a couple of years later, they could care less, but they were into it. And that's what I remember as much as anything, just how much they loved it. I mean, I loved it too, but how much they loved it, which was just wild. Yeah.
We went to Disney a few weeks ago, and we were at breakfast. We were talking to another family, and there was a wee boy who was 12. And I said to him, "You're excited to go on the Marvel rides?" And he went, "Oh, I've never seen a Marvel movie." And I was like, "What?" And it was really weird. It was like this cultural shift had happened. And if you think about it, they have been not great for the last 5 years or so. But as he put it to me, he said, Avengers Endgame came out when I was 7. He said, so I've got 20 years worth of stuff to watch before I can even watch Endgame, so I just missed it. And I never thought of it. To him, it was like the Lone Ranger. It was just before his time.
Oh, that's just depressing. I mean, find that kid and just tell him it's worth it to watch through Endgame. I don't know. Yeah, that is depressing. No, like I said, my kids were way into it and then not. I don't know. Yeah. But they also don't really care about, I mean, let me put it this way. They still like Spider-Man. Like they were all in for that last Spider-Man movie. We're all in on for the Spider-Verse, like totally into that. Yeah. But, like when it came time to like, hey, do you guys want to watch, Andor and whatever, or any of the Star Wars, just like no interest. Yeah.
Star Wars is like homework to kids, isn't it? Like, I mean, I remember
they'll watch the originals. They'll watch the original trilogy. If I said to them, hey, there's Empire's going to be on a big screen, here in LA, we have obviously a lot of great, there's always a revival house showing something. They'll go to that. They're okay with that, but they have no interest in a new movie or a Mandalorian movie or anything. They just don't care.
It's all guys with grey beards, really, that's going to see this stuff, isn't it? I mean, it's not kids.
To me, it's just always, it's Star Wars fans basically convincing themselves that it's like, no, this one's the good one. And then 2 years later going, okay, that one wasn't so good, but this one's the good one. Yeah.
I showed my kids, I said to them, we should all watch Star Wars, and they really wanted to watch it in order, like episode 1, episode 2, which I didn't like the idea of because it blows all the twists and everything, but they were insisting on it. So for
how old were they? When did you do that? When did you do all this?
I made sure they were about my age when I saw Star Wars, so they could appreciate it the way I did. So I do that with everything. Superman when they were 8, that kind of thing. And they watched all 9 Star Wars movies, and to them, Star Wars is a thing that starts terrible and then gets inexplicably good for a little while and then really sucks again.
That's a very unique perspective. I did exactly what you did. I took it one crazy step further, which is basically I saw it, 77. So I was 7 years old. I'm 1970. And so I waited till my daughter was 7, although my son was still 5. Yeah. And at some point or another in the course of my crazy collecting, I own a print, a non-special edition 70 millimeter print of the original Star Wars. And I rented a theater and basically invited all of my friends that had 7-year-old kids. And I said, we're gonna see Star Wars. Yeah. And I had a buddy that owned a print of Empire Strikes Back, and we did that about a month later. And then I own a print of Jedi, and we did that about a month after that. And so that's how I made my kids watch the original Star Wars, the first 3. Awesome. And then, as they wanted to, we watched, new movies as they came out, and they went backwards and watched the prequels. And it was interesting. My son, who at the time was younger, I finally, for the first time, understood the prequels a little bit, meaning when he was 8 and 9 years old, he actually liked the prequels way more than I ever did. I never, whatever. And my daughter, they didn't hit her, but they worked for him for whatever reason. The action, the little kid in the first one, I don't know, just, to a young kid, they worked for him. And he was into it for a long time. And then one day, just not. And now. Do
you remember that feeling when when episode 1 came out? In that build-up, remember we dial-up internet at the time as well?
I flew to New York City. A friend of mine, basically, his friend was somehow connected to 20th Century Fox and got me invited to a screening like a special pre-screening in New York City, and I flew to New York just to see Phantom Menace, and that was like on I can't remember what day of the week it was. Like it was like on a Thursday, even though the following Wednesday it was coming out, and I already had plans to go, whatever. And what I remember is sitting through it, being so disappointed, and then having to go the following Wednesday in LA at the Man's Chinese, and I napped during it. I kind of like fell asleep in the middle for a while. And by the way, you know where I fell asleep? You'll laugh.
Yeah.
I fell asleep during the pod race, which is, it's that thing of like, it's like so on 11, it might as well have been on 2. It was just it's so fast. It's nothing. And I just bored me to death. And it was weird. And I'll tell you a funny story. Sorry, this is a very weird story. So somewhere after that movie, my writing partners and I, Jeff and Alec, who I mentioned before, we had done a draft at this point of the movie that became The Cat in the Hat. But I want to be really clear about this. This was our original draft before anyone was attached to it or anything like that. And I will argue, I'll sit here and argue, and I will tell you simply, it was a really good script. The movie that was made is what it is, but the original script was really interesting. And we got a lot of really interesting, as it happens in LA, we had a lot of really interesting meetings. And one of the meetings we got invited up to Lucasfilm to basically that George Lucas was putting a movie together. Yeah. And so we flew up to Lucasfilm and we met with Lucas and I think one of the head of either Lucasfilm or the head of ILM at the time. And he sort of was pitching us this idea. Basically, this was what I remember of it. He basically said that, he'd sold Pixar previously and was now, everyone at ILM wanted a shot at making a full CGI animated movie. They wanted to do the Pixar thing. And so George had a story that he was looking for writers. And we never heard much about it. We thought he was going to be telling us the story. He never did. It was a very strange meeting where we sort of interviewed each other in a weird way to tell him about us because he doesn't talk much. But it ultimately was in outer space and it was going to use music a little bit like American Graffiti did, but it was going to be modern pop tunes, meaning it wasn't going to be original music like a Disney movie. It was going to be sort of a musical, but with known music. And I think it became that Forest movie that came out after Disney bought Lucasfilm. There was like an animated Forest movie with music, pop tunes that came out. I think that's the space movie that I think it turned into that. But long story short, we have the meeting. We go up to Lucasfilm, which was really cool. They locked us in a room while we waited because they were editing, I think, the second or the third movie. So you weren't allowed to walk unescorted throughout the building. It was top secret. And all of that was really cool, whatever. We had the meeting. A couple of days later, they call our our lawyer and our agent, and they want to offer us the job. And they offer us at the time, like literally like 1/3 of our rate. And I mean, it was like almost insulting and we didn't care. We were kind of like, okay, it's George Lucas. There's gotta be a way to make this work. And we tried it. I remember we were like, how about we'll do it for 1/3, but in success, because we're willing to gamble on ourselves. In success, you make us whole just to our rate. Like, we're not talking about like owning any of the movie, but just if we do what we say we're going to do, you get us to our regular rate that we get from everybody else. Yeah. Oh, no, we can never do that. It's profit sharing. George doesn't do that and blah, 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 blah. And it's very funny because I always said, if Phantom Menace hadn't come out, I'd have done the job anyway for 1/3 of our rate. But because Phantom Menace had come out, we were able to say no and not take the job, which was probably a good thing. So yeah, that's what Phantom Menace did to me, I guess. Yeah.
Because Lucas, he and Spielberg almost don't seem like real people, don't they? They feel like Mount Rushmore kind of things, like I saw Spielberg in real life once in the DreamWorks office when I was in there doing a meeting before I sold to Netflix. And he was through a glass wall and he knocked the wall and waved to me and the guy I was talking to. And it was like a spiritual encounter or something. It was like seeing a ghost or something, you know, like how could Spielberg just be having lunch and coming back and sitting at a desk?
No, I mean, I'll tell you another funny sort of odd story. We just had the 20th anniversary of Eurotrip, which is the terrible, wonderful teen comedy that I made with Jeff and Alec. Yeah. And we sold that to the, at the time, somewhat newly formed, not newly formed, but we sold it to DreamWorks. It was a Steven Spielberg movie, and which, you know, is so cool, Steven Spielberg. Yeah. And we, in our original draft of the script, we had this sequence in Amsterdam that involved the Anne Frank house. So at some point or another, we had a phone conversation with Steven Spielberg, who had to ask us to take the Anne Frank scene out of the house, out of the movie, because he was on the Showa board and all of this stuff. And it was just this weird thing where it's just like Steven Spielberg on the phone with you telling you, can you cut this scene? And it's just sort of like, sure, anything you say, Steven Spielberg, because you're Steven Spielberg. Yeah. So yeah.
It must be so hard being an exec at a studio when you're working with a Jim Cameron or a Spielberg or somebody, because they come with that amazing emotional baggage for you as well. It's like you're not going to say, have you thought about trimming 10 minutes off Avatar 2?
Which, by the way, is probably the problem. I mean, at some point or another that, you know, at some point these guys, and by the way, Lucas too, I'm guessing, you know, I'll tell you a funny story. So the second to last episode of Veep, and that final season was the season after Julia recovered from cancer. And the final season, we sort of originally were going to do 10, but because of like trying to make her life easier and whatnot, we ended up doing 7, although the last one is sort of double length. So maybe it's 8. But anyway, so there was a lot of kind of mushing down. And when we got to the second to last episode, I was flying to New York for the premiere, but we were still editing. And I ended up making that episode. Normally our episodes were about 28, 30. Sometimes they crept up to 29 minutes, but I'm a big believer in comedy being under 30 minutes. And I went on that second to last episode. I think I'm at like 32 minutes, which doesn't seem like a lot. And my biggest regret, if I have one regret on Veep, I have 2 regrets on Veep, and one of them is I would love to go back and take 2 minutes out of that episode and get it under 30 minutes. And so when you watch these movies by some of these guys and no one can tell them, just get an hour out of it. Like, I don't get why it's 3 hours. It's just, I don't understand.
Superhero movies especially. I mean, the idea of bloated superhero movies is crazy. I think 127 minutes is as long as a superhero movie needs to be, isn't it?
And probably 121 is really, but yeah.
Because Superman the movie was 127, I think, and I always see that as the perfect length. You know,
it is a perfect length. And by the way, as we are well aware, because, you know, the other thing that I used to love, and did you guys have this where you were in Scotland, which was like when it finally premiered on ABC in America, because with all the commercial breaks, they stretched it out to 3 hours and they added scenes. Do you know about all that?
No, but I went down that rabbit hole in the 90s. Like, there was 20 minutes of Superman I'd never seen, which blew my mind. You know?
There's more Superman. There was more Wrath of Khan. There was more, you know, and whatever.
There's more Wrath of Khan? I've never seen that.
There was a couple of little scenes extra of Wrath of Khan that I think I think you can now buy quote unquote a director's cut, and they've been added in, but it was originally in America on the ABC Sunday night movie, where it aired from 8 to 11 o'clock, all stretched out, you know, with commercials. And, you know, and so now, you know, you had for a long time, you know, as a kid, it was just like, what are these extra scenes? Because some of them, there were photos, you know, there were photos in things, and you're just like, there's no scene of Jor-El being held prisoner on Krypton with 3 guys wearing welding suits or 2 guys wearing welding suits. Like, that's not in Superman. Where is that from? And of course, one day you're just watching, and it's like, oh, there was more on Krypton. Yeah. And they cut it down. God bless them. And they did the right thing.
The greatest mystery as a kid. You know, the trading cards would always have a couple of scenes, like the Icy Peril was a Superman one where he's covered in frost. And I was like, what the hell is that?
Where's this? Yeah. Where's this? Yeah. Icy Peril. Yeah. I'll tell you something you'll really enjoy, because you're a Larry David fan and you Superman and everything. I have a dream sketch that I almost wrote up, and the next time Larry hosts, I hope Larry hosts Saturday Night Live again. I swear to God, if he hosts SNL again, I'm going to write this and send it in. But it was basically the idea of Larry as Jor-El addressing baby Kal-El, as he's sending him, as he's rocketing to Earth, and he's teaching him science and he's teaching him about the world, whatever. But then it's Larry as Jor-El just going, and then sometimes you go in the bank and there's 2 lines and one line isn't moving, so you move to this line, and it's Jor-El as very sort of Larry and very annoyed and petty with the ways of Earth, and that is my dream Larry Jor-El sketch. That you're the only person on Earth I could tell that to. So yeah.
I always thought like Larry and Jerry, I always thought had a Batman Superman kind of vibe to them. Like one was the sunny one was the nighttime one.
One's the dark one. Yes, exactly.
But then you could sort of see there's a slight darkness in Jerry though, isn't there? And
there's
a light.
Certainly, and Larry has more light than people realize. Larry loves to laugh. Larry can be silly, and Jerry, whatever. And so it does work both ways. But yes, the definition, you'd start a season of Seinfeld and Jerry would be excited that we were doing another season, and Larry, of course, on week 1 would just be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we got to make 22 of these." And there was something very enjoyable about that. So yeah.
Because I noticed it on Comedians in Cars, which I'm also obsessed with as well. I love Comedians in Cars. Jerry almost seems like a Kryptonian observing the human race through a telescope, doesn't he? Like he's never quite
a little alien. Like, what is that? Yes, exactly. Yes. We had a very funny moment with Jerry, which I don't know. I'll tell you the story. This was at the tail end of Seinfeld. I always remember this. We must have gone to New York for something. And anyway, long story short, we're talking with Jerry, and at one point or another, he just sort of says, we must have been at a restaurant. And he talks about, we had been at the restaurant, dessert. It was dessert. It was like, we don't want any dessert. No, thank you. And then, of course, because we're with Jerry Seinfeld, they bring out all these, wonderful desserts, whatever. And Jerry goes, I don't understand how these restaurants make any money. It was like, what do you mean? It's like, they're always, they put dessert on the menu, no one orders it, and then they bring you everything for free. And it's like, no, Jerry, they bring everything to you for free. The rest of us pay for our flan, basically. But yeah, that's Jerry.
One of my pals was doing a movie with Will Smith a while back, and he said that after about 4 weeks of hanging out, you're just co-workers,
Yeah.
So they were sitting doing a script together and sitting chatting every day. And then he said about week 4, he went into a restaurant and everybody was looking at them in the restaurant, And he leaned over to Will and says, why is everybody staring at us? And Will Smith apparently said, because I'm Will Smith. So he's got the awareness.
Yes, he's not wrong. Yes, exactly.
But it's funny, I had no idea you were a sort of early 80s DC guy then. So you're probably the only other person I've met that was reading the Cary Bates, Elliot Magan, Superman, all that stuff. Because
I am the first to tell you, I was paying no attention to creator names. I mean, I really was. I was really it's funny. I'm not the best with issue numbers.
Yeah.
I remember stories, and I have learned, because as a collector, I have learned like certain writers and whatever. Yeah. But truly, as a kid, I was just happy to have a Superman comic. I did not have a favorite writer. I was aware sometimes when Superman looked weird, if someone drew him and I didn't like it, but I didn't necessarily, even at the time, go, I know who Kurt Swan is. It's a very funny thing. I was very agnostic to names. I didn't think about it.
That blows my mind.
I know, but I was reading it all. The first books I really probably picked up were probably like the Super Friends comics, honestly. And then, exactly. And then just some random Batman and Superman that I just kind of picked up and started reading. And also random Justice League, because again, I know who all these heroes are. And I just, that sort of, that 70s Superman, especially like when and again, I'm not sure I loved it. I just was reading it, when all of a sudden, of course, it's like Morgan Edge, and now he's not going to be a reporter, but he's a television reporter and all of that stuff. And by the way, everything that kind of went with it. So, in America, we had like Radio Shack did the special comic where it was like Superman and the Radio Shack twins team up to save the world and all of that kind of stuff. So I love that stuff too. But yeah, I just wanted comics. I mean, I don't know what else to say, you know.
That stuff was baffling to overseas readers though, because we didn't know what Radio Shack was.
Right.
And the
By the
one
way,
that
we
really
lived in
got us was
America. I'm not sure we knew what Radio Shack was, but go on. Yeah.
But you know that Hostess Twinkies?
Right.
Like I was
those
baffled
ads,
by
right,
this.
right. Why is this? What is this? Yeah.
The first time I went to America, I bought everything. I bought all those things because I thought, like, if the Joker is willing to, you know, steal this stuff, it must
Good
be
enough for
pretty
me.
good.
Good enough for me. Yeah, exactly. What is this?
Do you, in terms of your original art and everything like that, do you skew a little bit more your childhood, or do you have yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a wonderful crossover. You know, look, you read long enough and you read the books that everyone thinks are great.
Yeah.
But that being said, the sweet spot for me is, you know, anything, especially from like, I'll call it like 80 to 86, 10 to 16 years old is my sweet spot. And there are things, you know, that I, you know, to this day, you know, that I truly like read and associate with moments of my life. So for example, you know, I certainly, you know, and again, obviously I'm a Star Wars fan, but the Star Wars adaptation, the treasury-sized adaptation, I remember reading with my mom and dad on the beach that summer. We like took a trip up to like Martha's Vineyard, and I remember reading it on the beach. And so I have obsessively gone after pages and covers from the original 6-issue adaptation, because in America it was 6. For you guys, I think it was 12. But the original 6 issues of adaptation, and I own the cover to the big Treasury #1 because that is the first time I read Star Wars. And then, you know, another version I'll give you. I had my appendix out when I was in 3rd grade. And while I was recuperating from my appendix operation at Mount Sinai Hospital, I read Avengers Annual, and again, this is where I'm terrible with numbers. I think it's, X-Men Annual, it's 4 or 5, where Nightcrawler dies, and then the X-Men have to go into Dante's Inferno to save him. And of course, it turns out it's not Dante's Inferno. It's a creation of Dante's Inferno, whatever. And like I said, I remember reading that in the hospital, having had my appendix out. And so I have obsessively, you know, acquired that cover and any page from that book I've ever seen, because I just, it's such a visceral memory of where I was. And I think it's a great story. I mean, to me, it's Chris Claremont at his sort of soapy X-Men best with, you know, Nightcrawler's mother and all this stuff at the time and, you know, whatever. But, you know, just obsessive. And again, when you talk about like, you know, the cover, you know, we were talking about those books, those hardcovers. So, you know, the Batman from the 30s to the 70s, which has the famous Infantino Batman and Robin on the rooftop, which was like a poster and all that kind of stuff. Oh, I bought that years ago in a heritage auction. Yeah, I mean, to have the cover to that collection. I mean, and again, I don't think at the time when I acquired the cover, I quite even knew how much it had been used in the world of DC marketing, you know, how much they had used it on like products and, you know, binders and folders and posters and stuff. But for me, I was buying the cover of Batman from the 30s to the 70s. That's all I cared about. So that sense of nostalgia. Yeah. I don't know how else to put it. Yeah.
It's strange, isn't it? Because those touchstones are so powerful. And I don't know if it's the same with the stuff you do, but everything I work on, I can draw a line back to something I loved as a kid.
Oh, you know, most of the time,
You know, like Starlight's my love letter to seeing Flash Gordon when I was a kid.
Of course,
you know, it's everything I can draw a line to it. Do you feel that with these things as well? You know, that sense of connection?
I do, certainly. I mean, you know, it's a slightly less, you know, sometimes it's a less clear connection, because obviously I too can read. When I read your Starlight book, I could kind of go, oh man, what a, you know, this is obviously Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, et cetera, you know, but, and obviously specifically. So I think it's sort of easier when you're you're playing with genres and whatnot. But, you know, definitively, I guess I definitely think of, you know, I know it's more of like, almost like I remember certain comics and certain periods of my life, and then certain people that were in my life then, which then reminds me of a story. And it's like, well, what if that becomes a Seinfeld episode? You know, it's sort of that. And obviously in the grand scheme of things, like with Bizarro, the concept of Bizarro is, you know, a straight line from, again, those digests and whatnot, but also from that Superman book, because it had all of those great stories where, those are in there where, Bizarro has the kid and the baby is born human. So then they send it to Earth, and then the Bizarros invade Earth. You know, it's like 255, I think, or something in there, right around the issue there. And I read all of those, and then I read all of the, you know, adventure comics, Tales of the Bizarro World, and all of those. And so much of that is obviously just in that one Seinfeld episode. So yeah.
But it's like a muscle memory, isn't it? You know, you touch something and you remember. I think this is what we're all very nostalgic comic people, I think, you know, and you almost touch a back issue and you can remember seeing it for the first time, can't you? And it gives you on some level that same feeling you had as a kid.
Absolutely. And again, connect it further to the art collection, as much as I am collecting art, what I truly love is comic art that has word balloons on it.
Yeah.
Because so much of, especially when I'm buying an interior page.
Yeah.
I can tell you about every panel and why I want that panel, but more often than not, it's a line of dialogue on that panel. Yeah. You know, somewhere in there where I'm just sort of like, oh my gosh, you know, I need to have that page because of whatever the thing, again, you know, Swamp Thing said to whoever or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And it's as much about that word balloon, as crazy as it sounds, as it is about the art. And in my collection, I can own something that maybe empirically another collector would go, that's not a good artist or something like that, if it's from a story I love.
I'm exactly the same.
But if you give me the greatest artist, I don't know, whoever you want to pick is the current best artist in the world, if he's drawing a terrible story, I can look at it and I can go, that's very pretty, but zero interest if I can't hook into the story. Like I can't own art from bad stories. And when I've owned art from bad stories, it leaves my collection eventually. And now I try not to even bother with it, quite honestly.
It's funny because lettering some people see as crowding the art. No. I agree. It's like you see a clip of a movie with the sound turned down, and that's what it looks like to me if there's no dialogue on the page. Yeah.
Especially when it's a page with a really memorable line of dialogue. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's just, it sounds silly, but like, again, just you know, just certain pages and certain lines of dialogue, you know, it's like quoting a movie, you know, it's all of it. And again, I'm not trying to overcredit the writer or undercredit the artist or overcredit the artist. To me, it's the combo. It's the combo. And because what it is it's really me possessing, in a way, a physical manifestation of 13-year-old me reading that page. I can't go back to that moment, but now I can own the original art of a page that I can remember. I was reading that at my friend Tony Azer's house on 86th and 5th Avenue because I can remember this line and I remember us talking about it. And now I own that page and that line is there. You know, it's that.
It's funny. One of my friends who's now very wealthy, and I think he's probably got the best collection of original comic art in the world, probably. You know, he's got an amazing collection of it. But he's got an interesting thing he said to me, and he also collects every toy, you know, everything you can imagine. And he said to me, it's because when he was a kid, he kind of had nothing. He maybe had, he told me he'd one little toy that he treasured. It was a little Thunderbirds car, you know, and that was kind of his secret origin because he craved these things as a kid. So now he's wealthy and an adult, he buys everything, you know. Like, do you have that? Like, did you have it as a kid? Was it all there for you? Or were your family wealthy?
I mean, I definitely, you know, I got to go to I had comics, but I worked. I mean, I had jobs. I babysat. I worked summers. So.
But you weren't a rich LA kid or anything like that?
No. I grew up in New York City, and we were what they used to call, I believe historians used to refer to as the middle class. That's what we were. I'm not sure it exists. I'm not sure it exists anymore, you know, but you know, again, it was simpler times, you know, the rich people at that point, you know, it's like, I knew rich people. I went to private school in New York City, and I knew rich kids, and they were definitely kids where you went to their house and like the elevator, like maybe there'd be only 2 apartments on their floor, or the elevator opened up into their living room. And they definitely had like a ski house somewhere, but they flew on airplanes. They didn't own their own planes. And nowadays, of course, rich people own their own planes. And what can I tell you? My dad was a tax lawyer and my mom was a teacher, and they both worked, and I didn't have everything, but I had more than nothing. So again, we were kind of in the middle. I definitely, was taught to, if I wanted something, I had to earn it.
Yeah.
I just love the stuff so much. I mean, I do think you're born with the collector gene, whether you have it or not, whether you are given the opportunity to have stuff or not, you have that gene or you don't. And I unfortunately have it. And so I collect. If
you have a sequence of something that's maybe 20 issues long or something, but you're missing number 14, you have to get number 14.
Oh my God, that's not even a question. That's not even a question. Yeah.
But most people are like, that's fine. That's
the idea that I would even at this point have anything that is missing an issue is madness. Like like who told you that? That's not true. I have every sequence completed. No. And to this day, I was never a huge, certainly with back issues, I had back issues. I sought out back issues, but I never had like $1 million comic collection. I never had mint stuff. I never owned like the key Marvels or the key DCs. I had what I bought on the stand, and I did a little bit of deep diving to pick up certain runs in terrible condition just so that I could read them, because there wasn't the back issue. I'm sorry, there wasn't like the trade paperback world at the time. So I never had a crazy comic collection, but I had it all very organized. And to this day, I mean, they're in storage, but I have a lot of those runs still, and I'm not looking at them. I don't have any plans to go look at them, but I have peace of mind knowing that if I needed to go, find them right now, if I needed to, if I all of a sudden really needed to check out some Doug Mensch, Gene Colan detective with Nocturna and early Jason Todd, I can go find that right now if I had to. You know what I mean?
Have you ever had the kids organize it with you? Have you ever had your kids organize it?
We've done some of it. We've definitely done I keep a lot of my stuff. I own my pre-marriage condo. It's basically where I was living before I was married, and my wife and I we got married and then lived in it for about a year, basically right up to my daughter was born a little after the year, and basically we kind of moved out a little bit before her birth into an adult real house, and I still own that condo, and everything is kind of there.
Well, we almost went up to it last time I was running for a plane.
That's right. When we met and we had breakfast. Yes, you got to come.
That must be the Batcave or the Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, you got to come. You get a real kick out of that. You would really enjoy it. Yeah, and we could just pull stuff out and look.
So what have you got in there? What kind of stuff have you got?
That's where everything really is. That's where all the art is
as well.
Oh yeah, artwork, movie props, the toys, like everything. That's where.
That's like a secret identity, though, isn't it? You've got a key for this place, and it's your subconscious mind. Essentially, it's inside. It
is very much. I mean, it's so funny because it's like, if you can imagine, at one point it was a 2-bedroom condo with a working kitchen and bedrooms and whatnot, and now none of the bedrooms have beds, because it's just, there's flat files and display cases and so whatever. And even in the kitchen, there's just Star Wars stuff on the stovetop. You know what I mean? It's I'm not sure there's anything in the oven, but there might as well be like a statue in the oven. But you open kitchen cabinets and it's just action figures and things like that. And it's a little bit of madness.
It feels like a character in a movie, though. I love that, that you've got your separated subconscious, and then you've got your adult life, with your kids and everything. Is your house with your children? But is there any memorabilia, anything like that?
There's a little bit. I mean, I have a couple of odds and ends. I have more here. I'm sitting in my office right now, and the stuff that's here is a little bit more of my, I guess, personal memorabilia, things I've worked on and things like that. But there's odds and ends on my desk. Here's a, just this is kind of hanging on my computer. Just odds and ends, things like that, that are kind of around, but. Very much so, the notion of we're going to go over to, forgive me, daddy's condo, and we're going to go do something there, which was often okay, who wants to help me sort this pile of, whatever. We're going to sort, action figures, whatever. Yeah. We're going to try and separate them into the teams, and then we're going to find their accessories and that kind of stuff. We filled many an afternoon of, and especially when they were younger and certainly more into it all. But yeah, they like it.
There is that moment they're old enough to know the alphabet, but they're young enough to still think it's cool to alphabetize your comics with you. So I did it for 3 days one time, and the kids were loving it because it was like a challenge. And
it's like a game. It's like a game. It was a really great game, and they really did like it. But it's funny, I got my daughter. She definitely has read some Archie stuff and whatnot. And my son reads odds and ends here and there, but neither. And I desperately tried not to push it because I think the easiest way to get your kids to not read something is to, you got to read this thing. Yeah. And, and like I said, there was certainly a period of time where he loved, he especially loved the Marvel stuff. And I never quite got him to ever really read comics the way I guess I always hoped he or they would. And I don't mean to pick on the him. They've definitely read, modern schools, they have, graphic novels in classes and stuff and whatever. And so they don't dislike the form. And Lord knows my daughter loved like all like the Raina Telgemeier stuff. So again, it's not like, we don't want graphic novels, but they just never the desire to like, let's go. I tried with my son, like, I'm going to read with you, Amazing Fantasy 15, and we're going to read some early Spider-Man, and hopefully you will get into it. And it never took. And I made my peace with it. The day I die, the number of, auction house phone calls that the kids will be getting will be very special. So look forward to that, everyone. Yeah.
Well, my middle kid, when she was 9, I tried to get her into Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four. I thought that might be quite a good starting point. But weirdly, the thing she got into was adventure comics, 1960s adventure comics.
Just all that sort of spacey that space stuff.
Yeah, she really loved Legion, and that sort of became her thing for a little while. And then from Legion, she got into Lois Lane comics. Really, she loved the rivalry. I know this is like
very dated. Exactly.
Really loved the rivalry between Lois and Lana. Really loved that, and it was them outwitting each other and destroying each other and everything. She absolutely loved it. So there was a weird year where she had the same taste as a 60-year-old man or something. And at the same time, I got her into Columbo, and I thought, right, hang on, this isn't good. I've got to let her.
No, you're just slowly ruining her. Yes, exactly.
But before I go, I have to ask you. I'll show you my favourite thing, like in terms of pieces of collectibles. You'll appreciate this.
All right.
Which is Bob Oxner.
That is fabulous. I know
love
that
this.
well.
My wife got it for my Christmas a few years back, and that was the first image of Superman I'd ever seen, because I saw Superman in a Batman comic when I was about 5 or something,
Okay.
And there was a little ad for that Superman comic, and I was like, "Who's this guy?" And it's magical to me. So to have the Bob Oxner original, it feels really special.
The kid on his back. You're
it's the perfect
kid
intro
and
to Superman, isn't it? You want to be
comic,
that kid.
I'm not making this up. That whatever you want, that treasury, that issue, is sitting in my parents' place on 70th and West End right now in my old room. They've gotten rid of a lot of my stuff, but on my old bookshelf, which is still there, there's one shelf of like my stuff, and that issue is there. That's there. It's sitting there right now. Yeah.
Well, my wife's not a comic fan, but she tracked down the original art because she knew how much I loved that cover, and I was like, okay, this marriage was a good decision. That was good. So, what about you? What's your holy grail? What's your thing you love most in terms of art?
Oh,
if there was a fire, you had to run and get it.
Oh my God! It's like almost impossible. It's just truly impossible. God. I don't know. I probably, if I had to grab one thing, I'll say 2 just because I can't really decide. What can I tell you? I have the giant size X-Men 1 cover, and that run of, the new X-Men meant so much to me, still does, and even though really, where it got to, obviously Byrne and Austin, but that isn't quite there yet. I'd probably grab that. But on the other side of the world, which you'll appreciate, I own the original art to, it's the Lois Lane issue where she's bald with the giant brain, and Bizarro is basically showing up with the candy to go, hey Lois, you're beautiful. I want to, I really love you. And she's like, I'm hideous. Look away. Look away. And someone I knew had owned that for years, and it was sort of a, one day you have to let me get that from you, and I finally did, and it is my be all end all Bizarro piece, and I definitely. I can't, maybe I'll just figure out a way to get one under each arm as the flames engulf me.
Leave the kids,
like
leave the kids,
yeah, exactly.
Out,
well, hopefully they're old enough now, or at least I get another couple of grabs, because I'm like, kid, you go grab this and you grab that. But yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
And I have to ask, before we go, HBO, I've always been baffled by HBO's never done a big comic book superhero show, but has there ever been talk of that? Because you seem such a logical guy.
Obviously, they did their sort of the Watchmen thing, which is obviously comic book adjacent. We got it on Amazon over here. We didn't. It was on Amazon. No, that was technically HBO for us. I mean, that was an HBO creation. Certainly in the world of now, like Max, I mean, like I know there's like the Penguin show is coming soon. Right. I don't know if you've heard about that. I don't have an answer. I do think certainly in I wouldn't be surprised if we do see one again, whether I'm involved with it or not is a separate thing, just because all of a sudden now, the way, the entertainment industry has changed so radically in the last 5 years overall. And then certainly even just with the strike and everything that's gone on since then. And it just seems like more and more, they are leaning obviously into properties they own, and it doesn't take a genius to go, hey, you own DC Comics. So I don't have an answer, but you're not wrong. There's never really been a lot of them, but I do think much like there's going to be a new Harry Potter series and whatnot, I'm sure there will be more, just because I think they want to make things that they already own. And, again, they want to exploit property. I mean, again, I'm not sure these are creative reasons, but they're certainly business reasons, I guess. That's the sense I get. Yeah.
But their hit rate, I mean, maybe we just get the good stuff or something, but their hit rate for 25 years has just been insanely good, isn't it? Like, there've been a lot. HBO, look, obviously the great thing is, and again, it's been a pleasure to work there, because even when they miss, and again, missing is arbitrary. So I guess I'll say miss in the sense of it doesn't catch fire with the public. Yeah. Their misses are wonderfully idiosyncratic. They are specific. They're always specific, whether it's a viewpoint, an actor, a character, a story, whatever. And they're interesting and they're different. And most of the time they're not like anything else. Yeah. And sometimes they work and sometimes people miss them, but that level of storytelling is what HBO, I feel like, is always going for, and which makes it a really good place to work. I mean, that's the honest answer. They're not. And is your home for a while to come, isn't it?
Yeah. Next couple, a little bit more. I mean, I've been there already now for forever, and it's going to keep going for a bit. So yeah.
Because I drop you a line once a year and say, "Do you ever fancy coming over to Netflix?" But I know. You're always just re-upped, So.
I'll just, it has not been having bounced around for many years, and certainly, again, more so bounced around in the network television world, which, again, is dead now anyway. But, I had a deal at Touchstone for a while where, like, they were feeding stuff onto ABC, and it was just it was just so unfun. I mean, just like the notes that you would get were just so terrible and so stupid and so anti-comedy and so just trying to make things into what other things already were. I don't know how to express it. Just like, and even after I started working at HBO, once a year, like during pilot season, I would always go and help friends. Oh, you've got a show, and you show up and you hear the show, and sometimes you just hear the script and go, just what is this? Like, what story are you trying to tell? And it's like, well, we had this, but then the network said whatever. And it's just like, oh my God. And if I could say the greatest thing about HBO is occasionally we have disagreed about story points or plot points or whatnot, and they're actually occasionally they are willing. I shouldn't say occasionally, they are willing. They're willing to remember that they have hired a creative person to be creative, as opposed to hiring a creative person and telling them how to be creative. And that is my highest compliment of HBO. It's just a wonderful place. Now, that all being said, possibly in 2 years, there will be nothing but Netflix. So, at that point, perhaps Netflix will have purchased HBO and Time Warner. So perhaps we'll come together then, because it does seem like it is Netflix's universe, and and the rest of us are just living in it. But anyway, yeah.
That's a great moment to end on.
My ad for Netflix. Thank you. This was a real pleasure.
Great talking to you, and I hope to see you next time I'm in LA.
Yes, please, anytime, and I'll get you up to the condo. I promise.
Oh man, I look forward to it.